Wicked. Cool. So, back with another episode of Months in Motion today. Super excited for this one. Also joined by my incredible colleague, Jack Last. Again, back again. And today we are joined by Oded Shein, the newly appointed design director at BBH London, one of the most recognized creative agencies in the world. Oded's career has been anything but conventional, which we're going to get into. He started out agency life in Byte and Jellyfish, took a detour in mental health tech, the music industry before a freelance incident, and eventually landing at BBH, where he spent the last few years as lead motion designer before stepping up into his current role. He is a power user of Cavalry, which we'll be getting into at some point during this chat today. Deeply passionate about kinetic typography, and the relationship between sound and motion, and has been hands-on with the BBH Rebrand. He's someone who has carved out a genuinely unique path through the industry and has perspective on where motion design sits within brand and agency work. And we're going to be diving into all of that today. So, yeah, super excited. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. What an introduction. Yeah, nice.
I always like to go big on the intros. So hopefully did you justice. Wicked. I'd love to just kind of start off and jump into the journey side of things. So I would say, your path is quite an interesting one. It hasn't followed the kind of standard, junior to midweight to senior to director kind of role. So, you've been through some agencies, but also, as mentioned in the intro, worked in mental health tech and working in music as well, which is awesome, before BBA. I'm curious, when you look at those chapters, was there a thread connecting them at the time, or does the logic only appear when you're looking back and reflecting?
I mean, you can always, like in hindsight, find the patterns, but I think the thread is I'm always driven by curiosity and like the joy of motion, joy animation. And for me, that's not tied to a place or a specific, path. I think you can find that kind of joy of craft and that spark in any like small place, big place, in-house, agency, music studio, and like really random places. And I think that's what kind of driven me. It's always like this place I'm curious about, the opportunities I'm curious about. It's gonna make me push myself. So yeah, I think that's kind of the thread. Kind of like just let's jump, let's just fucking do it. Can I swear on this podcast? Sorry.
You can, yeah.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
no, I was part of it. You can go all out.
I'm interested as well. Like a lot of junior designers kind of, I guess, worry a little bit. I find around going kind of off track around the path of
Yeah.
like, do you go agency? Like when do you go freelance? A lot of these kind of questions that get sort of
Yeah.
floating around. What do you say to someone who's considering, sort of stepping outside their comfort zone, whether it be kind of going and learning a little bit more kind of more traditional design or kind of going into music and kind of looking at how that can enhance motion design as well?
Yeah, I think one stepping out of your comfort zone is key because if you're in your comfort zone all the time, you don't grow or anything. I think the nice thing, especially from my career, because it went to so many different, like this way and that way, and linked back to different places, you experience so many different places and so many ways of working and so many different projects and people and ways of working that you develop a giant bank of like how to solve problems.
Yeah.
And in the end, that's what we do as designers. We were like, client come to a problem with a problem, and it's like, this is how we solve it. So I worked in a small marketing place and just did explainer videos, and that I fell in love with character animation, illustration, and that refined the way I make stuff moves from bodies to like hands and like type. So, and I worked in like game trailers and music studios, like all of that stuff. Like you just build this huge variety of like problem solving skills, and I think that's really essential.
Yeah, exactly. I think you also as well, there then tends to be like a lot of crossover, right? Like when you start kind of
Mm,
animating characters and then you can kind of bring that, that life and that energy into type as well. And kind
mm,
of, there's those similar levels of
yeah.
overlap as well, like in those kind of very different sectors as well.
One that really stands out for me when we first chatted was the time in the music industry.
Mm,
Like, I really see that as a real differentiator, kind of having closeness to sound. I think it's all part of the, bringing rhythm into motion. Like, it's such a huge part. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that time that you spent in the music industry and how
mm,
that kind of affected the way you approach things like timing, mood, and obviously, of course, as
mm.
well, just sound design too.
Yeah. So kind of a backtrack on how I got into the music studio. And again, this is I think the beauty of working in design and the beauty of networking, and you never know where opportunity is gonna come from. So the way I end up in the music studio is because I met a friend randomly and he knew someone who was a music engineer who introduced me to the creative director. And I got there as a freelancer working on Trivial Pursuit, which has nothing to do with music. They were having a contract with Hasbro, and I made all the animation of Trivial Pursuit on the DVD game. And then from there, they offered me like, "Do you want to work here full time in the music?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And we had a department that mostly did, this is going to show how old I am, DVDs and Blu-ray menus for music, and then music videos and music fiddlers, and like, so it was a very niche skill. But it was a beautiful time in music where there was like money to put in like menus, and like you can be really experimental. But being like kind of exposed to music and like editing music tracks and like kind of tracks to footage really made me fall in love with like listening to like the beats of a song or track, and how does that impact the visuals, and how the visual impact the music.
Yeah, I think the overlap between like motion and music and audio is very tightly overlapped. I think when you can get that work in that sense of rhythm as well, it works so well, right? And it's something that, you know, a lot of the things that we talk about in motion, like, you know, when we're explaining how, I don't know about you, but when I'm explaining how things move, I kind of think of the sounds, you think of the way, you know,
Yeah.
how you make those sound effects in your head. So there's definitely a lot of crossover, you know, between motion and animation.
I think it's also can be quite like overlooked a lot of the time too. Like I think that was one thing, particularly when I joined OK, like Jack's always kind of really deeply into SFX and sound design, and just the amount that elevates a project.
Yeah.
I think it just adds so much. I'm curious, when you're kind of approaching new motion work, and say for example it is quite tightly linked to sound, how do you kind of approach that? Does the sound come first? Does the visuals come first? Do you kind of approach it hand in hand?
I think they feed into each other most time, to be honest, because I work as designer in agencies and studios. The project I work on already has a visual world and a visual language. So it's very different. Like if I'm experimenting and I have a track and I was like, oh, this visual will cool for this track. It's different. I already build the world. The motion language is already there. So then what I do is I will find the tracks that fit, and it will fit each other. If the track then has interesting beats, I will change the motion to fit that. So they kind of feed into each other in a loop.
Yeah, with that, it's always a bit of kind of like do a little bit of motion, change the
Yeah.
audio, you know, a little kind of always kind of back and forth as well. Like there'll be certain parts of the song where it kind of drops and you can like visualize that in an interesting way in the movement and kind of reflect
Yeah.
all of that. That's something we always really enjoy doing, especially when we get to work. We worked on a project recently where we got to compose a piece of music. So that was really fun as well. So like actually building the track from the ground up to kind of work
Yeah.
with the visuals that we created. You don't always get to do that, but it's super fun when you get to kind of experiment and really kind of dive into all of the stems and play around with the music as well.
And I think what's nice sometimes, if you're really good at motion design, and like if you really craft that piece, even if it's without audio, the motion sings in a way. Like you can hear it and you can hear the sound it's gonna make anyway, which is really nice.
It's the kind of the BPM of
Yeah.
the visuals, right? It's that, you know, you can kind of feel that flow. It kind of has that beat and the
Yeah.
energy, and it just feels right as well. I think that's the big thing as well. Often, like, you know, between like good and great motion design, it's that kind of energy, you know, and those little touches and there's all the beats that hit and those kind of the moments that really land, and you can really kind of justify that, I think. And yeah, that really speaks highly to like whether it kind of syncs with the music as well. And another thing as well, actually, I know you've been sort of experimenting a lot with as well, is the kind of use of Cavalry.
Yeah,
very
love
hot
it,
topic in the motion world right now. And I'm kind of just interested really to see, like, you know, how you discovered it, like what you're using it for, how, you know, you're looking to kind of grow that within the team and with the agency, and what you're excited for as well.
Yeah, so again, like Gravely is such an amazing tool. It's challenging After Effects and does a lot of things After Effects doesn't do. And I came across it, I think, ages ago when it started piping up like on the threads and on Instagram. I think I was at Jellyfish at the time, and I kept hearing this name Cavalry, and I was like, oh, it's really cool. And they were selling it as like not Cavalry, but like the vibe was like it's like creative coding without the coding, so that kind of experimental vibe and procedural. And I was like, this something that always really interested me. So I was like, I'm gonna have to try this. And they have a free version, which is such an amazing window for exploration for people who can't afford everything. And that's so wonderful. And I kind of dipped in and out. And because of I'm a bit selfish in a way, like I want to push myself, which makes me try new things. At BBH, we had during the rebrand where we were working, and we're going to talk about that later, I know, is I really wanted to push that motion. I was like, let's try something with Cavalry. Let's see what it can do, even if it's like tiny elements to begin with. Because, you know, if you got like deadlines, you don't want to stress with a new tool. You're like, I'm going to try this tiny thing. This tiny thing works on this, and that's going to lead me to exploration. And also, it's a proof of concept, because a lot of time people are like, oh, why do you need this tool? Or why did you? If you show them what the tool does, if you have a proof of concept, it's very easy to convince them to buy the software or let you play with it.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's definitely some really great use cases for Cavalry coming up. I think especially when it just comes to like motion design and like iteration exploration, I generally just found it's very difficult sometimes in After Effects. You know, it
Mhm.
one for like not being procedural means that, you know, if we want to make changes, you kind of have to
Yeah,
redo everything and sync everything up and change all the precons. Versus in Cavalry, you can iterate really quickly, change some
yeah.
sliders around. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, this is looking completely different. You know, I think
Mm.
that kind of ideation phase in Cavalry is super fun and really interesting
Yeah.
to explore.
And it opens up ways that you wouldn't even think you can do in After Effects before. So, and that leads to ways of showing different things and new ideas. And that's really nice. That's kind of ideas by exploration and experimentation. It's really lovely.
Yeah, and I think the knock-on effect that has as well is it just creates stuff that is like visually very different to what's out there.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, like when you're looking through Pinterest or wherever you look at
Mm.
references, you can really see the stuff that's done in Cavalry. It really stands out because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, that feels incredibly different to this, and this. And I think that's
Yeah.
also really helpful as well. You know, when it comes
Yeah.
to
One of the big things for Cavalry, like for this agency, they just like we were doing a promo video for BBH Studios, which is like how we support artists and stuff and like production. The entire video was typed, and the entire video was 90% was made in Cavalry, which for me was such a nice challenge because I was like, I'm gonna make all of this in Cavalry. The storyboard was done in Cavalry, and then everything was built with that. Yeah, it was such a fun experimental video.
yeah, love that. What are you out of interest? Are you found that there's a lot of like resource available for like learning Cavalry, or is it something at the moment? Like, have you found like good tutorials, or is it a case of you just like been actually jumping into Cavalry and playing around? Because I think a lot of something a lot of juniors are asking, like, and sort of people reaching out going, oh, like what do you use to kind of like learn Cavalry? You know, because it's a newer tool, there's less tutorials out
Yeah.
there, you know. So I think it's like for us as well, just like finding those good tutorials and ways of learning, or you kind of just found it's easier to dive in.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, like there weren't many around, but there's a few wonderful motion designers, and I know one of them is named Haley, but I forgot her surname, so I apologize. But she
Yeah,
made this wonderful Notion page with deep dive into everything Cavalry, and like there's tutorials and there's like YouTube playlists that keeps updating, which I always check with loads of Cavalry tutorials, and that's such an amazing like wealth of information.
yeah, no, yeah, we know Haley. We've got the got that Notion toolkit as well. So
Yeah,
I think everyone's kind of using that as their foundation at the moment
yeah.
for I think Cavalry. Yeah, no, love that. And are you kind of at the moment? Are you doing a lot of crossover between like Cavalry and After Effects, or are you trying to kind of go like, let's just focus on Cavalry, let's see how much we can do in here? Or is it still a case of like where you're kind of doing, you know, some Cavalry stuff, doing some stuff in cinema still, and then
Yeah.
Cavalry, and kind of like blending those worlds together?
Yeah, I blend everything because again, like I love Cavalry. I'm on a journey with it, but it doesn't yet compare to the like 20 years I have experience with After Effects.
Yeah.
So some things, especially when deadlines, I'm a lot faster in After Effects. So I find I work in After Effects, I make stuff in Cavalry and I bring them in together. Um, yeah, except that one project was purely Cavalry. Most of it is joining bits.
Yeah, love that.
One thing I'm finding quite interesting is there's definitely a growing awareness of motion design as a discipline. I
Mm,
noticed recently we noticed that a lot more people were kind of finding our website through the search term motion design rather than
mm,
animation, which everyone kind of used to just put it under. I did a post actually the other week about kind of like what exactly is motion design,
mm,
but I would be curious to hear from yourself how you would define it, because I think it's a more well known term, but I think like a lot of
mm,
people still don't necessarily understand the differences. I'd be curious, like for someone that's maybe like outside the industry or doesn't kind of know the differentiating between the two. How would you kind of define motion design?
It's funny how you said animation because every time someone, again, like someone in their 60s or 70s who like outside the industry and ask me, what do you do? And I immediately say, I'm an animator. I was like, and they were like, oh, Disney? I'm like, no, no, not Disney, not Pixar. I
Yeah.
do this. And they're like, oh, okay. And you see like they're trying to figure it out. And I was like, just fine. Yes, I work at Pixar and then just go walk away. I think like motions, yeah, it's such an interesting like term. And I think we spoke about it, and I teach motion design to people and I teach motion theory, which I think is really important because I take away the tools and I just talk about the theory of motion. And the way I explain it is, for me, motion is the love child of graphic design and everything graphic design is, like layouts, color theory, type, and then animation, which is timing and pace and weights and all of that stuff together. And I bring those in. And the way I describe it to people, I like it with like a story. So like imagine you type in the password and it shakes because you put in the wrong password. That shaking is telling a story of like, hey, you're wrong. That's motion design. That's like really essential of like conveying complex information in a really simple way, moving way.
Yeah, I think as well, like the fact that, often, with motion design as well, like you can do all of that without a script, without audio cues. It's just
Yeah.
purely visual, right? So like you say, those visual cues of how do you say something wrong or right is,
Mm.
how do you get that narrative? And, bringing those graphics and those designs to life as well, and giving those bits of energy and movement that kind of helps it all come together.
And what's nice, I think, and I think maybe some people find it confusing when they talk to a motion designer, because I think the nature of motion designers, we're very curious, a lot of us are very technical. We tend to like touch so many aspects of the production pipeline. Like some of us will touch editing, some of us will touch special effects, retouching, rotoscoping, all of that stuff. That is quite a mystery to a lot of people, and like grading and like, so a lot of people, especially like teams like accounts or project management, they don't understand everything that a motion designer can do. And that's, I really try and sell that, like to explain, we're also designers in our name. We can graphic design. Our ideas do amazing layout, 25 frames a second. So each frame is like, this is a good design layout. And again, yeah, special effects, some of us do that, explaining that to people like, oh yeah, you can do that, oh, and that. And you know a bit about, and you don't have to be an expert, but you have to know enough to explain to people, to understand the pipeline and to know who to talk to and what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing for especially like accounts teams and stuff. We've been doing motion talks with agencies, and teams have been really keen for us to get in and just kind of explain it a little bit more, because I think there's a lot of people that sit on the client side of things, selling projects or talking about what's possible for upcoming plans with their clients. And yeah, I think motion is just quite an unknown thing for a lot of people. And yeah, we've had a lot of like people just really interested, like, hey, can you come down and just tell us a little bit more about it, which has been been really fun.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of steps into the process side as well there, like around the breadth of the stuff that you work on, like big style frames, references, into animation, whether it be like editing, design, looking at audio. So I'm kind of keen as well, like in terms of like when a brief lands on your desk, how do you kind of like to approach it, whether it be like if you're working as a team or like, working on a project for yourself, like how do you like to structure that project? Like what are the processes that you really like working on throughout those stages?
And I think this kind of goes back to the lovely journey of going to different places and trying different things and working with different studios and different ways of working. I think it builds a bank of Pinterest in your head that has so many like references already. So I think because I've been doing this for like 20 something years, in my head it's already there. Like the Pinterest is already there. And so if a brief comes in, I already kind of like know roughly what the vibe is. And kind of when I teach motion theory to people, and I start with like, ask yourself, what's the story you're trying to tell? Ask the brief, talk to like the documents, what's your story? So what are you trying to say? Why are you gonna move the way you do? Why are you gonna look the way you do? And that kind of builds everything. So like if I understand, if for example with the BBH brand, it was like a specific vibe. I was like, okay, the story is this vibe, which you're gonna dive in a bit later. And then from there, that leads to like, okay, this vibe leads to this type of motion, this type of reference, this type of style. So yeah, does that answer your question? Just some kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, no,
tangent
100%. I think on like with that as well, like in terms of the references and the mood boards,
there.
like is that something you still find yourself like leaning heavily on? Like, do you still like to put lots of references together and stuff, or are you like very kind of like jumping in and kind of getting started as well?
I think a lot of us were constantly online, and every place I work, I have a little Instagram group with the designers I work, and we want to share lots of stuff. So we have a really lively group here where we share lots of inspiration we find. There's endless Pinterest boards for every single topic, always collecting references from anywhere, like, Pinterest, Instagram, old cartoons, new cartoons, anime, all of that stuff just like blends into like loads of things together.
Yeah, always such like a big amalgamation of like crossover as
Yeah,
well. Like, you'll see really cool like type design over here and then this over there, and kind of like
yeah.
bring that all together. Touching on the kind of motion theory you spoke around as well, like when you're sort of teaching that and talking to
Mm.
people about that, what do you find the people kind of struggle with the most, or is like one of the kind of common like not mistakes, but like things that people struggle with that you kind of find?
I think people struggle with a lot of them with transition. So they think about a scene and then the next scene and then the next scene, but not how they connect to each other. And that's sometimes I see people struggle with that. People sometimes just stick the easy on and don't spend a lot of time on the curves.
Yeah.
Don't understand why the curves do what they do. What does this curve mean for that? What emotion those curves mean? So I think that's what people forget about that.
Yeah, I think transitions is always a big one as well. I think often you can easily kind of get stuck in your kind of transitions, the one
Yeah.
that you like to do. You'll kind of see it, the transitions you like to do as a motion designer all the time. Whether it would just be a slide or a match cut,
Yeah.
or whatever that is. So I think, yeah, always looking at how you can take the narrative of the story and what's happening in that scene, in that section, and actually weave the transition into that as well. So you're not just like sliding, like we're talking about diving in, like can you reflect that in the transition? Can you
Yeah.
weave that movement into the motion?
And
So I
also
think,
letting stuff breathe as well. Because
yeah,
a lot of people
pacing is
kind of like just like bang, 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 bang. And I was like, I think because maybe because we're motion designers, we look at the thing so many times that we already absorb it really fast. And also I think we think really fast as well. So sometimes like let the copy stay on for like an extra 2 seconds to breathe and like
yeah, I think getting like the pacing and timing right is always a kind of the hardest thing, right? Like figuring out exactly how many frames that needs to be on there for, and kind of not too long, not too short, getting
mm,
that energy and the pacing right.
Nice. So we're going to talk a little bit about the BBH
mm,
rebrand. That's a big one. Globally
yeah.
recognized agency, motion and kinetic typography at the core of the new identity. There was shout out to our friends at Studio Drama. I know worked very closely on
mm.
the typeface on that one. I'm curious. I think you mentioned before, like this was very much you had a lot of ownership of this project, right? Be curious to hear, like, what were the key motion principles that you established for the brand when working on the new identity?
Again, that was such a massive project. Again, like so cool to work with Studio Drama. They're such an amazing, talented people, and we work really close together. We're still in touch after the project, which is really lovely. That project in itself, it had its limits. Basically, it was nearly purely type, except the 3D zags and black and white. Those two things really limit you to what you can do. So you can't really hide behind a lot of like fancy tricks or something. The motion has to be like that because it's so simple, black and white and types. Can't really do mistakes. And what's nice, like the BBH kind of mantra is when the world zigs zag, which to me means unexpected eyes, like a bit of like a visual punch in the face. And that's kind of what led to for me to do the motion principles. Like I wanted like the curves to be like this, like really extreme, like when I snap, the punch you in the face. So the movement will be something from here and something from here. So like there's a zig and a zag. And like I also like wanted to play with inverting flash frames, so like da 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 da, like that's like black, white, white, black. Really like punchy and visual. And they let me really explore. They let me have a lot of fun with it. There's a huge boards of like R&D of like stuff I've never saw a lot of day. And also I'm a huge fan of high frame rate. I wanted to go beyond the 25 and 30 frame to get it really smooth. So, but also you got a whole world lives in GIFs. Everyone presents GIFs in decks, and GIFs have a limit of 50 frames per second. So like this is my cutoff point. As much as I wanted to be 120 frames per second to be super cool, I'm not, because it doesn't make any sense for presentation. I'm going to stick at 50.
Yeah.
Still looks really smooth. Allows for like the GIFs to be presented in decks. So that kind of motion language is conserved no matter where you put it.
Mhm.
When you're kind of experimenting with this project specifically, when you were doing a lot in Cavalry, was that something
Yeah.
as well where you did like just a lot of iterations, or did you to kind of like build the storyboard, or did you have a pretty clear idea of the storyboard first, or did you kind of like play around with Cavalry first, one to see what visuals you could create, and then how you'd kind of weave that into the storyboard? Because sometimes I feel like although you can kind of stick to the more traditional way of going storyboard, animation, sometimes doing some animation and kind of test first will kind of influence the ideas you have for the storyboard.
Yeah, and again, depends on the scene, because some scene had like keywords that really lend itself to a specific type of movement. Like something was about speech, so I made a mouth from like type,
Love it.
or like an eye from type that blinks and it changes to black from white. That really lends itself to that. But there was some bits that were like you say, you play around with the cavalry, you play with like, oh, this duplicator and this stagger and this and this, and you're like, oh, this wonderful layer that I didn't even think was possible came up, and you make it fit in that because it's really cool.
Yeah, awesome. And how long did you have on that project? How long did you kind of spend like experimenting, and how long did you spend sort of on this and that?
And the brand overall, I think we
Yeah,
had a couple of months.
nice.
But when it came to crunch time, there was a lot of like, okay, need this now,
Yeah,
and like,
let's go.
yeah,
Yeah, it was awesome project. Definitely the impactful kind of like you were saying with all the theory behind it definitely came off. And I also just, I think I commented it when you put the post up, but like that very limited color palette, just like black and white. And I just think that works so well. The contrast between in the two just really kind of delivered that like impact, like you said, punch you in the face kind of visuals.
yeah.
Yeah, loved it. Speaking of kind of motion identities, when you're kind of working across motion identity, obviously you're talking about a lot of different touch points and creating cohesion across multiple different applications, multiple different touch points. I'm curious, how do you make sure like the system all stays together, whether it's a social post or a pitch deck, like you said, or a full campaign? What's like the most important things to you to kind of link that all together?
I think you have to make sure that the system you're building is flexible. So I imagine it's a bit like Lego. Each block is a Lego recognizable thing, but it doesn't matter what you do with it and how you build it, it's still going to be Lego at the core. So if the foundation is strong, if you understand that what are your language blocks, not blocking, but like your foundation of it, then you can build anything. And then you make sure that like it's flexible enough to be adaptable to different formats, because there's so many random formats these days and they keep changing and there's all these new things. So your system can't be too rigid, has to be a little flexible to be able to move around.
Have you kind of experimented or kind of spoke to clients much about the use of Cavalry within in those design systems as well? Because I think the benefits of Cavalry, for example, is that, you know, like you can create like type presets and stuff that you can then, you know, really quickly change and implement. I think a lot better than kind of After Effects, you know, the use of CSV
Yeah.
files, etc. You know, I'm kind of really interested to see where that goes in terms of like branding as well, because I think it
Yeah.
lends itself a lot better than like traditional kind of like After Effects templates
Yeah.
that, you know, quickly get outdated, and then, you know, it can be a kind of struggle with like plugins and presets and, you know, all of those other things as well.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between who you talk to. So if I build templates and I talk to designers and editors and the producers, then I go into a bit more detail. So I use this and this and this. But if it's for like not a lot of clients or accounts know enough or need to know, all they need to know is like they think solves my problem and it works and it makes me work faster and it provides my solutions. They don't really care how it's made to an extent, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
I
for the
want to
themes here, like, yeah, I show them Cavalry, I show them After Effects, and we build stuff together and we like stress test a lot of things together.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think just like like we kind of spoke about a little there, kind of like education around like the processes and what's possible as well. Like rather than just being like, oh yes, we can do this, you know, being able to offer different solutions and kind of
Mm.
making, I guess, just like the wider team aware as well of what's
Yeah.
possible and what you can do as a motion designer.
Yeah, I mean, I like to sell skills, not necessarily tools, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I want someone to know, yes, my team can rotoscope. Yes, my team can motion track. Yes, my team can, animate this type this way, because I want to show you what we can do, not necessarily how we do it.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to dive into one of my favorite topics around networking. You've obviously built a very strong network over the years, working across a lot of different industries. One thing that I think particularly people starting out can struggle with is kind of finding that a bit uncomfortable, and like, how do they build a network? I would love to hear from yourself, where you've kind of moved through, as I said, a lot of different industries. What worked for you, and what would you suggest to people starting out and maybe a bit more fresh in the industry, looking to widen their contacts?
I think networking is hard because I think a lot of us are quite introverted, and networking is a long game. You have to plant a seed and you're not always going to get a return straight away. So you have to and again, I think because industry moves so fast, the way we consume stuff moves really fast, attention span is really short. People expect really immediate results. So I think go to networking event, go to like design talks, meet other people, like chat to people, but don't come off as like, what can you do for me right now? Have a chat, be nice, be humble. And when you talk to someone, have something to show in a way, like say, I'm a designer, well, I just did this, here's my portfolio. Make sure your portfolio is good because they want to see something else like can help them. And also a lot of it, to be honest with you, is luck and chance. Like I tell you quickly how I got into the industry, which is a really random story. Like I was working as a security guard somewhere many, many years ago. And one of the other security guards knew I did an animation degree. So introduced me to one of the people who went there, who was Robbie Sherman. Robbie Sherman's dad and uncle were the Sherman brothers who wrote all the songs for Mary Poppins and Bambi and, lots of really the classic Disney songs. So that person was in the animation industry. He was making animation film and he hired me as a storyboard assistant, which basically means me scanning 3,000 pages and like fixing it in Photoshop. But that person introduced me to the editor introduced me to a partner who was in a production agency, and they offered me a freelance gig, and that's how I got my break. Very random, so there's no like logic to that. But I think with all those things, be humble, be nice, be able to offer something to someone. and don't expect straight away results. Just plant those seeds.
Yeah, I think that was just did an episode with James Martin, and one of the excerpts that I used for the clips that we put out was around him talking. It was just like just have loads of conversations, and like you
Mm,
said, I think just don't go into it expecting, don't go into it to like selling yourself. I think there's a lot of incredible people in our industry. Like I love connecting with other creatives and so many people with interesting backgrounds and interesting stories, and I think it's just a case of just like have a lot of conversations, right? Like
yeah,
put yourself out there. It can feel a bit uncomfortable at first, but the more you do it, and I also think it feels more uncomfortable when you're trying to get something out of it. I think
yeah,
if you just go in with a natural curious conversation,
yeah,
you want to understand and learn a little bit more. I definitely think that's the
yeah.
best thing, and just have lots of those conversations.
And definitely reach out to people. Like now we have LinkedIn and everything. Reach out to people you admire and say, "Are you open for chat? Open for mentoring?" I love mentoring. I've done mentoring a few times before, and it's a really nice way of one passing knowledge and like passing wisdom to like younger people. But it's also for them to like meet other people and meet creatives. And there's no shame in like, "Hey, do you have time for a quick chat?" All they're gonna say is no. And what's wrong with that? They might say yes, and then something might happen from it.
Yeah, you also you start developing a thicker skin after a while as well, because a lot of people are
Yeah,
a lot of people are busy. I think I spend probably 80% of my job is not get it's just getting ignored. So I want to talk a little bit about the new role, stepping into
yeah.
design director at BBH.
Mm,
Congrats again. I know when
thank
we,
you.
we first chatted, it was on the horizon, but now it's
Mm,
obviously it's public. So yeah, congratulations! An
thank you.
amazing role to be stepping into. One thing I've noticed is it does seem like a lot of agencies now are putting motion first people into more senior leadership positions, which is great to see. We love to see
Mm.
that. I'd love to see it here. Like, what does it mean when an agency has motion thinking embedded at that level, rather than it being treated more as kind of like a last thought, downstream like strategy.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I have been seeing a lot of motion directors, which is a fairly new title, or head of motion. That didn't exist a while ago, and that's really, really important. I think it shows that motion design is moving beyond just the doing and into the thinking and into like how does and again, because we live on so many devices and attention span is so short, if something doesn't move, it doesn't really catch your attention. It's kind of that really, I think maybe it's a bit grandiose, but like the old flight or fight thing, like, oh, something caught my eye, and you're like, oh my god, like it's there. So that movement is grabbing your attention, and I think good brands understand that they need to like grab the attention of people, and it stems from like the tiniest micro movement on the website to like how does the type move on their campaign or how they come up on social. And also I think there's a respect. I hope there's a more respect for motion design as a way to come up with ideas, because I think a lot of people think the way they think, and maybe a motion designer will think differently and have different preferences. I think that will good collaboration with motion designers can lead to ideas that maybe by yourself you wouldn't have thought about as a different team.
Yeah, I definitely think we're kind of seeing a lot more motion design being asked for in the kind of strategy stage as well, like being brought on sooner, right? And kind of going, how would you influence the design? Like, how can you bring this to
Mm,
life? And it not just being a designer going, here you are, animate this storyboard that I've created. Like
mm,
you kind of getting involved with that. Like thinking about transitions together. How can you really collaborate on that process as well? And how can it like infect the brand and the way everything moves?
yeah,
It opens up new
yeah,
directions, doesn't it? I think,
Exactly.
when you're working with motion from the start, even if you might just be talking about a static identity, actually
yeah,
thinking about that from the early stages is gonna, even people that aren't motion design, be like, oh wait, didn't think about it like that. It could lead
yeah.
in whole other directions. I think, yeah, super important.
Hmm.
Yeah, and like I know in the industry we always come across as motion last a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And there's amazing motion first approach, but I want to be motion alongside. Not everything has to be motion first. As long as I'm alongside at that table, I think that's the goal.
I love that. Is that something that, I mean, I feel like BBH probably already doing this, but are you going to push for that more,
Mm.
even more so now? Like it's always going to be very,
Yeah,
yeah, awesome.
yeah, definitely more motion alongside things. And also I think because a lot of us in the team are very technically curious, so we explore stuff like touch designer or creative coding or other stuff at Cavalry. So again, I think that all of that exploration leads to new ideas. So I think that's really important.
Of that. And I'm keen as well, like looking ahead, are you kind of looking, where are you seeing sort of motion in the world of like agencies and brands heading over the next few years? Like what do you see going on? What do you kind of see changing as well?
There's obviously the scary word AI that we can have a whole conversation about at a different time. It is here. It is for better for worse. Again, it's there. A lot of clients are asking for it. A lot of clients don't understand it and they think it's a magic word that fixes everything and everything is fast and cheap. It's not. So I think in terms of motion design, it hasn't yet come to motion design as much as it come to other aspect of industry. It might. I hope it won't. But I think that's kind of like, as long as you understand the craft and the taste and the language, and you understand why you're doing something and why it moves the way you do, I think there's always a place for motion. And I really want to keep that and I want to push for that. And even with like, if clients asking to make something in AI and make it move, I still want to be there to judge it and say, okay, this doesn't move the way it should. Do we need to use AI for this? Or I want to be the guardian of craft and the guardian of skills and all of that.
Yeah, I think even with AI though, like you still need, like you said, you need that motion theory. You need that direction of the way, the way it should move. And I think that's where often we kind of run into hiccups with the use of AI, right? Is that it's really hard to direct those curves, those little nuances. You don't get that detail and that level of control that as a motion designer you want, right? You want to be able to control all of these things. You want to be able to adjust this frame slightly, cut this over here and here, and adjust the curves, and you want that control, right?
Also, emotion's such a big part of it as well, right? And like AI can't feel emotion. It can tell you what it thinks an emotion is or its interpretation from whatever it's learned, but it can't feel it. And I think that's such a big part of motion design, right?
But it does have interesting uses. For example, I know quite a lot of few motion designers spoke about it online, is the helping with creating bespoke expressions in After Effects or Cavalry or whatever. Like there's a few times where I created, like example, BBH couldn't buy me this plugin, so I tried to make it myself in like with AI. And I think it's really useful. It really helps with like, if you don't know coding, this helps you write this code. And if you ask it to explain you, then you learn something as well.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the kind of problem solving as well, right? We've kind of done it a few times, creating like plugins and scripts for like tidying up projects or kind of like little text presets and stuff. So like, if we create text animation, how can we create this as a preset that we can kind of hand over and pass along, and all these things that, again, kind of like, I think it expands the knowledge, right, of a motion designer. You can do different things, you can work more effectively and more efficiently. And kind of like lean into that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I just want people to keep experimenting and try different things, whether it's traditional craft or this more AI stuff.
I've got one last question. I've got a feeling there's going to be a lot of motion designers, budding motion designers, motion designers kind of in there, maybe midway through their careers at the minute. I would love to hear from yourself as someone with such a breadth of experience and now, leading such a fantastic team. What would be kind of just like one piece of advice that you would give to motion designers really looking to step up?
I think one is be nice to yourself, but also I think all the time when we as designers, we think there's a very straight road down the career. We think designer, junior designer, senior designer, lead designer, then design director, then head of design. And that when you get to that role, that's a lot of people skill and management skill, and that's not for everyone. And if you don't have to go that route. A failure if you don't go that route. You can be an amazing senior designer for 40 years and does not make you a failure if you're not head of design or design director. If you want, go try it. Like, for example, I tried it in different places and I didn't like it. I didn't want to be just a resource manager. I missed the tools, I missed the making. So I found the places that allowed me to balance of like mentoring, leadership, motion leadership, and still hands-on. And again, I think what we touched about in the beginning, go try new places, go try. It can be small, it can be not famous. You don't have to chase the big brands. Chasing big brands doesn't mean the work is good. Yes, you have a fancy name, but doesn't mean the work. You can have a really not famous client from some like small in-house, fine fintech something, but the work is beautiful. That translates. So
often the ones that will be a lot more brave, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Less kind of guidelines and restrictions, right? They're more probably open to you kind of flexing your skills and come out with ideas where the bigger brands, you kind of might have a little bit more constraint around what you can and can't do, right?
Yeah, and don't get tied to tools because tools change so quickly. Just get the foundation, get the craft, get the skill, get like the understanding of emotional language, and watch a lot of things. Because I watch a lot of videos. I watch videos I don't like as well to learn something from that. So yeah, just watch and absorb.
Love that. Amazing. Well, Oded, this is a fantastic conversation. As always, before you go, we've got to get a little peace sign so we can shout on LinkedIn. But no, I really, really enjoyed this one. It's been, I think I really enjoyed talking to people that are more on the tools and really getting into the nitty gritty of it all. And I know Jack loves that too. So thank you so much for joining us and for your time today. And
Yeah,
are you around for D&AD next month by any chance?
I hope so. If not, if yes, then let's meet for a beer. If not, I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
meet at other events.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna be flying over into London for the week anyway. So
Nice.
drop you a line and hopefully we can actually
Yeah.
properly meet in person.
Yeah, grab a beer. That'd be good.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Amazing.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for your time. Thanks so much,
Awesome,
man.
Thank
Catch you
you.
in a bit.
Great to meet you as well. Take
Okay.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.